I remember he was wearing this Homer Simpson t-shirt, like that I needed to meet him. Like he had this big, beautiful beard, and like he was just so incredibly attractive. And I was so nervous talking to him. We were sort of inseparable from about like 2 months in. We just didn't really spend a night apart. And yeah, so I met him at the beginning of 2012, and sadly passed away in December of 2012. It's sort of the thing that you just never really can prepare for, and you just have no idea. You know, every single minute you just have no idea what your body is experiencing. It's just complete shock, and you just shut down. And I can't really remember what happened. I remember going to his house, and I remember the police telling me what had happened. And I remember not much else from that day. I can sort of remember being at my friend Melanie's house and everyone coming over. And I just couldn't, I wasn't able to function. And then for about a week, it was just like being in a dream. You can't process it. All you can feel is this incredible weight and this pain that, you know, once your body goes out of shock and once your body stops dealing with it by shutting down, you just know that there's going to be this immense tsunami of emotion.
Nick had taken his own life. What Victoria was experiencing were the early stages of grief. Victoria's older brother Ewan helped support her after Nick's death.
The first 48 hours was sort of non-stop watch of Victoria and being by her side, so that was shared between family and friends, and I don't think there's any way of really preparing for that kind of grief. So it was very challenging. It's certainly the most traumatic thing that I've been through with my family. So because she was just breaking down at any given time. So, and quite hysterical and quite physical. I mean, you think about emotional pain, and I never realised how much that kind of a grief is physical. So she really wanted to lash out and sort of fairly damaging to herself and everyone around her. So
after Nick's funeral, Victoria's family suggested that she see a psychologist. She pleaded with him to medicate her.
I really wanted drugs. I really, really wanted drugs. Because you want anything to make it stop.
Richard Bryant is a professor of psychology at the University of New South Wales. He says that grief is often misdiagnosed as depression.
Traditionally, what often happens is that people who are feeling low after bereavement, they look like they're depressed. So what do? They get antidepressants. And that's very, very commonly done. Now, when we look at treatments that actually work for depression, they don't work that well for people with prolonged grief. Now, a lot of those people would currently be being prescribed antidepressants, and what's more, they're being deprived of treatments that could probably help them.
Professor Bryant and many other experts believe this problem may be worsened by recent changes to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The DSM is one of two major guides used in Australia. Published in 1994, the previous DSM stated that a patient should not be diagnosed as depressed in the 2 months following the death of a loved one. This was known as the bereavement exclusion.
In May this year, the DSM-5 was published, without the exclusion. The decision divided the medical community. Now, antidepressants can be prescribed as early as 2 weeks after a traumatic event.
Now, I think it was a mistake, because what it can mean is that many people will, in a trigger-happy way, be overdiagnosing depression in the context of bereavement and prescribing antidepressants.
Victoria repeatedly asked for medication, but her psychologist firmly advised her against it. Instead, he used cognitive behavioural therapy. This method helps to break cycles of negative thought and gets the patient to a state where their moods are no longer controlled by their painful memories.
And he just kept on persisting and saying, no, in the long run, you want to be feeling these feelings now. You want to just be getting them out of the way and feeling them while they're fresh and while they're there, rather than having them boil up at a later date. And, there are certain things that you do shut off and they do come up later. But I think if I'd gone on any sort of, antidepressant or any sort of anti-anxiety medication, I think, I'd still be taking it now and I probably wouldn't have dealt with a lot of the things that I have dealt with. He just listened to me talk for a couple of weeks, I think, just to expel every single whim of little flights of fancy of any sort of thought, just having someone there to bounce these ideas off. And then gradually, as I started to process what had happened, he began to sort of guide my thoughts away from this sort of intensely dark, introverted, horribly self-critical and hopeless place. And he just began to gently give me mechanisms with mindfulness, where to acknowledge certain thoughts and then let them go, and to not indulge in them, but to just see them in the totality of what they are and what they represent.
Often people will actually have very strongly held beliefs that I'll never feel any different, I'll never be happy again, this person was everything to me and nobody can ever fill that vacuum. Now, if you have those sort of thoughts, then you are going to feel pretty bad. And so teaching people how to identify those thoughts and how to think them through more realistically, and then teaching people, that's like dealing with the past. And then we've got to teach people, well, how do you then deal with the future without the loved one? And it's not about giving up the loved one, it's about how then do you develop, how do you alter the relationship with the deceased in a way that's functional now that they're dead, but allows you to keep living in a functional, adaptive way.
I feel quite good now about the progress she's made, and a fair bit of comfort now. So, but yeah, give it time, because time's the only thing in these circumstances that's going to pull them through it. So,
about 6 months after you lose a loved one, most people will actually start to adapt. And when I say adapt, I don't mean they get over it, but that very, very strong emotional pain, it's with them every day, it's interfering with their capacity to live, they're just unable to move forward in terms of relating to other people, make plans, that sort of thing.
Somebody who's just grieving, as opposed to somebody who's mentally ill, can see beyond the grief. They do know that there is going to be this period afterwards where things are going to go back to normal. Within myself, I feel like I'm going okay. And obviously it's still a massive struggle to come off as normal once you've had a huge thing like this happen. And it takes a lot of energy to not let it consume everything and to still be able to go out and have a normal conversation with someone. It's really taxing, but it's something that you have to do to get on with life.